Hello, everyone. It's another Black Conservative. I'm Ryan Bowling. Thank you all for joining me once again. In this video, what I want to talk about is a interesting little article from Breitbart News. It's an opinion piece in reference to a individual whose name I cannot really pronounce. Okay, so I read this article. I'm going to use acronyms to use the letters of his first and last name. But apparently, the writer of this article is basically saying that the individual that he's writing about is a part of what he called the woke Gestapo. You know, this guy's woke. He's one of these liberal left people who is basically upset that Hollywood is going to be fearful of casting someone who is not white as a villain in their films, and he's bothered by that. You know, in other words, this whole idea that if you cast anyone other than a white man or white woman as the villain, preferably a white man, then that's a bad thing. You're leaving a negative image about that particular ethnicity. But as I read the entirety of this article, I did come up with some thoughts about what this particular woke person was saying. There is some truth to what he is saying, but most of what he is saying is not accurate. It's produced and stirred up by the Marxist insurgents keeping the division going. But I do have something to say about this whole idea of white and black villains and what they tend to portray in films. So let's get right into this article. Let's get right into this. And the article starts off with privileged humorless affirmative action recipient and infamous woke tart Kamal Nanjiani. So I'm going to say KN throughout the duration of this article, so you all know what I'm talking about. And then, once again, this is an opinion piece that I'm reading. It's always crybabying about something. Now he's mad because Hollywood's understandably terrified that members of the woke Gestapo, like KN, will get upset if someone other than a white guy is cast as a villain. Today's self-inflicted luxury problems from our uber-privileged millionaire class. This is interesting. He says, I think that Hollywood now, even though they're trying to be more diverse, is still weird, the actor says. The problem in Wagers is that good intentions can sometimes lead to misguided solutions. If the bad guy is a brown guy, what message is that sending? And that's just as limiting as anything else, he says. I want to play more bad guys. Ian would like a career as varied as his Marvel stablemate Sebastian Stan, who can flit from superhero to serial killer. He does these big Marvel movies and then he'll play a sociopath. I was told that's going to be hard because people don't want to cast non-white people as bad guys. I'm sorry this is happening to you. Now we go into the writer's statements. Say, what's it like crying yourself to sleep on a bed made of gold and Kleenex made of $1 million bills at night? That's funny. In other words, you making all this money, getting all this money, you're a millionaire, and you sit up here crying about something like this. Woke people tend to always do that. Let me say this. They do tend to always do that, at least in the popular celebrity field. They always tend to be crying and upset about something. I've noticed that. They never seem to be happy about anything. They never seem to be happy about anything. They're always mad and always upset. In fact, there was a statistic analysis done several years ago that said that people that tend to be on the left tend to be more depressed, tend to be more pessimistic, tend to be more depressed, tend to be more down. And people that are conservatives tend to be more upbeat, tend to believe in God more, tend to be more optimistic. Just saying. He seems to reflect that analysis. He seems to be one of those individuals that is in that same boat. You making millions of dollars, but you want to cry about this? Come now. Goes on to say, you know, these anti-art Nazis have been running around for years, decades really, whining about typecasting, which has always been a lie. In popular culture, straight white guys have almost always been either the villain or the arch villain behind the black or brown villains. C24, he has in parentheses. But now that woke McCarthyism, a religion, spreads like Elmer Gantry on meth, has made movies and TV so predictable that skin color and sexual orientation automatically tells us who's virtuous and who's not. Now that Elmer Ian got everything he wished for, he's still crybabying. And that's true. It's like, you see this more now. And all of a sudden you see all the villains seem to be always white. And I mean some of the most despicable people. It seems to be like nothing's likable about them. See, what I see in this kind of concept is Marxism. It's inciting division. But let's go on. See, I can spot a Marxist a mile away. The opinionated article goes on to say, what do you want? You have everyone terrified, Elmer. If they dare ask you to play a villain, much less Gaps, an Islamic terrorist, they have to worry, and not without cause, that they will end up in your Twitter blacklist barrel. And I've seen a picture of this guy. I don't think he's not white or black. I think he's Indonesian. He looks Indonesian, but I'm not sure. But that's what he looks like. He looks like an Indian man. Article goes on to say, why would anyone risk their career, risk being called a Nazi for 3 days on CNN, asking someone as thin-skinned and grievous addicted as you worked hard to play a villain? Got a valid point. All of Ian's movies flop, even his Marvel movie, but he still gets work and he's still not happy. Because that's how they are. Woke people are not supposed to be happy. They're brainwashed. They're brainwashed to be mad. They're brainwashed to be angry with everything and everybody. And they don't even know that they're being brainwashed and manipulated and being used for idiots. But let's go on. Cry me a river, pal. Cry me a river. This is what this guy said. I will, however, give Ian credit for this. He does appear to be growing up at least a little bit. When asked about Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino's criticism of Marvel movies, his answer was actually thoughtful and mature. And evidently, this is what he was saying, right? I obviously love the movies Tarantino makes or Scorsese makes. I do too. And I may disagree with Scorsese's opinion on superhero movies, whatever them opinions were, I don't know. But I mean, who else has earned the right to have an opinion? You mean earn the right to have an opinion? Everyone should have a right to have an opinion. You don't got to earn the right to have an opinion. Whatever. If Scorsese hasn't earned the right to have an opinion on movies, then none of us should have an opinion on movies. Mostly, he seems a little perplexed. This is the quote. It's so strange that people get upset about it. So do we have a little personal growth happening here? Or is it just another mercenary actor hoping one of these legends will hire him? Funny. End of that article right there. That's a pretty straightforward, simplistic article, opinion piece. But I wanted to speak on this because there are some things that I think is important that people understand to fill in some of the gaps that I feel the writer of this article, this opinion piece said. Now, as I said before, this individual that he's talking about, I never heard of him, never seen him. I mean, I have seen him. It may have been in passing because I hardly watch mainstream movies anymore. It's been a long time since I've been in the movies because the movies stink. I can look at the trailer and tell you the movie stinks. It all looks the same. The camera angles look the same. The lighting, cinematography looks the same. The dialogue is all the same. It's all pushing woke leftist ideology. Why would I waste my time or money? Anyway, so I don't hardly know this guy, okay? But it seems evident to me that he's another brainwashed liberal. He's another brainwashed, useful idiot. He's spewing the same kind of nonsense that those on the far left are spewing. He's a slave to the system, and he's never going to be happy. But what I wanted to fill in the gap is that do a little history here. If you look back in early American history movies, in the early 1900s, when filmmaking was relatively new in America, white filmmakers did portray blacks in a negative way. Now, what do I mean by negative way? Because I'm coming to a point here. Most of the imagery of blacks in earlier American film history, like I said, from the early 1900s, 20s, 30s, and 40s, mostly showed blacks as subservient to or submissive to white people, that they couldn't think on their own. They couldn't do things on their own. It always seemed to be cast in a buffoonery worldview. Like they couldn't do it, like Stephen, what was his name? Stephen Catch, I think his name was. Well, whatever you said, sir. You know, they were always shown in a way that was underhanded, and they had little to no intellect. They were not able to make their own decisions. They had to always depend on white people to do things for them. This is in the early history of American films now. But they weren't cast necessarily as villains. The only movie that I know during this period that cast blacks as villains was a late 1920s movie by the name of The Birth of America. And the film was directed by a racist, and he supported the KKK. And in the film, he shows the KKK as the heroes of America, and he showed blacks as villains. He would show it was scenes of blacks, and I think the film was silent. It was a silent film, but they didn't have sound at the time. And there were scenes where blacks were supposedly trying to rape white women, and these blacks basically were white people in blackface, but they would rape white women, and the KKK's objective was to save the white woman from the animalistic tyranny of the black man. So the blacks in the film Birth of a Nation, rather, that's what's called, Birth of a Nation, were seen as villains. But that was one of the few, if only, movies that blacks were actually shown as villains. Later on, blacks, as I said earlier, were shown in a subversive, submissive state of being. They couldn't do anything on their own. You know, Stephen Fetchit, that's his name. They couldn't do anything on their own, okay? It was always shown, it was never shown in a powerful leadership position. Now, when you start moving towards the late 60s and early 70s, you start seeing a progression in the way blacks were filmed in films. Now, I'll admit something. Let me go back a little bit. Because whites were making these kind of images of blacks in the early 20s, 30s, and 40s, black filmmakers began to get together and make films that reflected blacks in a more positive light. Now, by more positive light, I simply mean they were more astute, more articulate. They walked around with suits and nice clothes on, and they were intellectuals. That's what I mean by positive light, okay? So they always, so the black filmmakers had to do their own thing to show blacks in a more positive light, and not show them as these people that couldn't make choices for themselves. Okay. However, towards the late 60s and early 70s, we started to see a progression of the way blacks were presented. Okay. And what I mean by that is one of the first films that actually showed blacks in an anti-hero concept was a film directed, wrote, and produced by a man who has since passed by the name of Melvin Van Peebles, who was the father of Mario Van Peebles, I believe. And he made a film in 1971 called Sweet Bad AAS. I almost said the word song or something along that line, but it was a cuss word in it. He made it in 1971. He couldn't get financing from any of the Hollywood studios, so he basically financed the film himself. And the main character is shown as this anti-hero. And he's beating up the white establishment. And it was a movie that basically showed blacks as the aggressors. He wasn't the bad guy, if you will, but he was an anti-hero. Some of the things that he was doing wasn't really good, but the way the movie presented this main character was one of, the white man wants to suppress him and destroy him and so forth. So he's going to fight the system. And if he has to break the law to do so, he's going to do so. Right. Okay. So that was one of the first films of a movement known as the, what was the name of that? I forget the name of that term. I should know that, right? Blaxploitation films, which was a big, big thing in the 1970s. Melvin Van Peebles' film was one of the first to push that ideology. In fact, that movie was required viewing for the Black Panther in the 1960s. They required their followers to watch that movie because it was a militant type movie. Okay. Anyway, to make a long story short, let's move further. So a lot of the black filmmakers wanted to make movies that reflected this kind of ideology. And this movie, by the way, let me go back. the movie that Melvin Van Peebles produced, it made a lot of money. Hollywood studios, which were mostly controlled by whites at the time, saw how this movie was making a lot of money in the black audience, in the black market, because a lot of the white filmmakers didn't think that black people, this is what they thought about, but this is how they thought back then. You know, this is what it was. They didn't think that blacks went to the movies, because going to the movies at that time was considered to be intellectual. And a lot of the white filmmakers didn't believe at the time that blacks went to go to the movies because it was intellectual. But they found out from this movie that Melvin Van Peebles had produced in 1971 was making a lot of money. So they caught word of that and said, hey, let's start financing films that cater to the black audience, that cater to the black market. That's where the so-called blaxploitation films came in. We had movies in 1972, 1973, 1974, 1975. I think it went all the way to 1977. Films like Coffee, Sheba Baby, Hell Up in Harlem, The Mac, you know, all these films began to come out. They were called blaxploitation films. And in these films, the imagery of these main characters was not always the most moral of characters. They were what we would call anti-heroes. Okay? The Mac, the main character, played a pimp. That's not positive, right? But his idea of being a pimp was to get out of poverty. You see the anti-hero thing here? So all this kind of stuff went on. But to make a long story short, you get what I hope you get what I'm trying to say here. Is this is the imagery that was presented by the white Hollywood studio movie makers in the early 1900s, and how they changed things up later on. So this individual in this article is partly right in that if you present certain imageries, if you present whether it be a white person or a black person as the main character in a negative light, it does send a perception to the viewers. It does send a world. It does send a mentality to the world, to the people that view the movie. Now, the problem with his woke assessment, okay, is that, as I said earlier, a vast majority of most of the movies today, and even in the past, the villains were mostly white. The only movie that I know for the most part that had a black villain, that was an actual black villain that I can remember, was Training Day with Denzel Washington. Clearly he was a bad guy. Clearly he was the villain in the movie, right? But Denzel Washington played the role so good. And what was most of the roles that Denzel Washington played before Training Day? They were always positive roles. And even after Training Day, he still played positive roles. Even in movies like The Equalizer, that's really a positive role because he basically was trying to bring equality and justice to people who had been done in. He was just killing them to do so. So, I mean, this whole idea is really a Marxist attempt to sum this video up. It's a Marxist attempt to keep the races divided, to keep us angry, to keep us upset. That's part of Marxism/communism, is to conquer and divide. And then the equalizers, the so-called communist equalizers, come in and supposedly fix the day. That's the plan. Keep white people angry, keep black people angry. And however way you can do so, whether it's in films, music, politics, religion, do so. But it's up the way I see this, it's up to the people to see this and be able to spot it and expose it and not give in to it. That's what I see that this individual is. Or another, and I agree with this assessment of the writer of this article. I agree with his assessment. This is another crybaby, always crying about another woke tart crybaby, always crying about everything, never can be happy. It's like something in their brain says, don't be happy with this. You're making millions of dollars, but don't be happy. Don't be happy. You be happy, they're going to stop giving you more money. You playing the use for idiot role, bro. That's what you playing. But that's my thoughts on it. What do you guys think? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe to my channel. God bless you all, and see you again.